Welcome to Topcast and to the second of my reaction videos to some prominent public intellectuals. Last time it was Peter Bukosian, the philosopher, and today it is Jordan Peterson in conversation with Douglas Murray, both of whom are iconoclastic 21st century commentators on culture and philosophers in their own right, I would say. Jordan tends more in the direction of psychology, psychoanalysis, and religious thinking. Douglas Murray tends more in the direction of literature and a critique of woke ideology and, I guess, a diagnosis of culture's modern maladies. Both of them are among the most prominent, that's unquestionable, and influential, absolutely, and powerful, among others, defenders of the Enlightenment alive today. They're prominent because, well, Jordan has no want for peers when it comes to reach online, but he now commands only one side of the audience, even though the other side for a while entertained him and gave him airtime, by which I mean people on the left or people who might have disagreed with his politics, let's say. But because he showed up the mainstream media for what they are, the vacuous kind of blowhards they are in many, many cases. You see certain interviews that he had with people in the media, both Britain in particular and also Australia, when he came here to visit our country, and he has been interviewed a number of times on Australian media. They just treated him with disdain, and that was their mistake because he took them to task rather easily. But in any case, because he showed up their bias, he is now persona non grata on many podcasts and many mainstream media channels as well.
You cited freedom of speech in that. Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
now, Douglas Murray, on the other hand, he reaches both sides of the aisle to some extent, certainly more than what Jordan does. But he's still regarded as emblematic of what a conservative is. Indeed, he wrote a book all about conservatism. They're both influential, as I said, because when they speak, people do not only listen, they have their minds changed rather often because their arguments are usually quite cogent. So is this going to be me heaping praise upon them for an hour? Not quite. But it's also not going to be me disagreeing with them consistently for an hour as well. They ask earnest questions in the clip that I'm going to be showing you, and because they're asking earnest questions, I'm responding to them because I think I have the answers. Well, when I say I have the answers, I'm gathering those answers sort of in a mash-up way from Karl Popper and David Deutsch, obviously. This is where I draw a lot of inspiration from. I think many of these people, Peterson, Murray, Shapiro, you name it, can be helped with the ideas of Karl Popper and David Deutsch. And what you will hear here is confusion by both Murray and Peterson about what would constitute a positive vision for people who are critiquing the left. After all, they quite rightly diagnose that the problem with conservatives rather often is that they provide a cogent critique of the people they disagree with, but they don't have a positive vision rather often. And you will hear them struggling to come up with a positive vision, and I think they fail. They even in this conversation, they talk about wanting to have a positive vision and then fail to provide any. Now, to be fair, Jordan Peterson has a website, and he has a university, and he has various other channels where he does try to do this. But why he doesn't manage to achieve an articulation of the positive vision here in this podcast here, this interview with Douglas Murray, I don't know. It just seems to skip his mind, and he falls straight back into, as does Douglas, in critiquing the people that they disagree with. So that's a bit problematic to my mind. And the issue at heart is they're conservatives, and so conservatives want to conserve something. They want to preserve or protect a certain thing, and they're struggling to come up with exactly, they talk about tradition, but they don't know what tradition they're trying to protect, what ideas and values and institutions they seek to conserve, and why. Now, you might guess what my response is going to be, because they don't come up with one. I don't think they have a clear vision of what it is. They talk around the issue, and even on Jordan's website, and I'll get to that, he talks around the issue. He never really hits the nail on the head, so to speak, when it comes to actually providing for people who might want to come to their channels and come to both Douglas and to Jordan for inspiration about what it is they want to conserve, or what it is that's good about Western Enlightenment traditions and values and so on and ideas. They don't get that. Now, with the left, they have a positive vision. Quite often they're talking about revolutionary things, they're talking about how they want to change things, how they want to make progress in the world. So they have these ideas of wanting to improve stuff. Now, I think they're, of course, wrong about how they're going to go about improving stuff, so I'm going to provide that positive vision today. We do have a poverty of understanding what the issues and values and problems with tradition are on the side of the aisle that is antagonistic towards the left. Now, there are two versions of people who are antagonistic towards the left. On the one hand, there are conservatives who are straight down the aisle on the right, so to speak, although I don't really regard them as being on the right, because the right, of course, are a version of collectivists, and you travel far enough on the right and you get to fascist, I suppose. That's one way of framing things. But conservatives might also be regarded as the opposite to fascists as well. So they're opposite to both communists and to fascists. If communists are on the left and fascists are on the right, conservatives do not occupy that part of the spectrum. Now, people like Euron Brook and Javier Milei and Michael Malice and the Ayn Rand objectivists in general, the anarchists, libertarians, they would all perhaps say they are not part of that spectrum either. But they're also not part of the conservative movement either. Now, the conservatives, they talk about tradition. They don't really know what the tradition is. People like Douglas Murray say that the tradition, even though he's an atheist, will come down to religion. He's a non-practicing Christian, but he thinks that the tradition in the West is built upon, and this is something that echoes what Ben Shapiro says, the Judeo-Christian culture. They think it comes from there. And Jordan Peterson is absolutely all on the side of the Christians largely, even if he is middling about whether or not he believes these things. He's sort of, he's never quite clear about whether he believes or he doesn't believe, and he always says things like, when people ask him if he believes in God, he likes to say things like, well, what do you mean by that question? What do you mean by belief in God? What do you mean by God? And so he dances around the question.
Do I believe in God? And I don't like that question. Well, what do you mean by believe?
Now, people like Euron Brook and Ayn Rand, Michael Malice, capitalists, objectivists, anarchists, they reject all of that, of course. They reject out of hand the supposed important place that religion has, and someone like Euron Brook will say it's not Judeo-Christian cultures, it's not the Judeo-Christian worldview that Western civilization is built upon, but it's built upon the ancient Greek philosophy, and people have built upon that, and so people like Ayn Rand come along, and supposedly they fill in the gaps that are left by the ancient Greeks like Aristotle and Plato and so on and so forth. And so she apparently is building upon that. And that's really what Enlightenment Western culture is, and built upon people in the actual Enlightenment when it began itself, in terms of the British and the French Enlightenment figures and all that kind of thing. And so they want to say things like tradition, or certainly in Ayn Rand's case and Yaron Brooks' case, they want to say that tradition is actually not central at all to what Western culture is about, or at least it shouldn't be. Now, why do they say this? Well, let's have a look at actually what Ayn Rand says about this. So we can go to the Ayn Rand lexicon here with a link to the defining characteristics of tradition, and she critiques conservatism. She wrote this book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, which is absolutely worth reading. It's a great defence of capitalism, but it also critiques conservatism in a chapter called Conservatism and Obituary, and she says, quote, in that particular part of the book, quote, America was created by men who broke with all political traditions and who originated a system unprecedented in history, relying on nothing but the unaided power of their own intellect, end quote. Okay, so that is a break with tradition. Well, is it though? Is it completely a break with tradition, or are there traditions of speech and indeed trade and indeed democracy that are being conserved there, and something else that is key here, which I will get to, a particular kind of tradition, a tradition of criticism, as David Deutsch points out. So what else is said here at the Ayn Rand lexicon? Well, it says here, quote, the neoconservatives are now trying to tell us that America was the product of faith in revealed truths and of uncritical respect for the traditions of the past, end quote. Well, really uncritical? Is that what the neoconservatives are saying? Maybe they do, I don't know. Maybe some people. Anyway, it goes on to talk about tradition as being about stagnation, that capitalism is the only free, dynamic, creative society ever devised, and is defended in the name of stagnation. Well, okay, so I appreciate the appeal to a free, dynamic and creative society. Now, whether or not it all comes down to capitalism is another matter, or whether it is something deeper and broader than that, of which I would say capitalism is just one manifestation thereof. There are also traditions of, for example, free speech and the free vote. These are the freedoms that I talk about, the kind of liberal or liberty-centred attitude towards institutions, and I will come to this as well, namely free trade or capitalism, free speech, free expression, and the free vote, which is democracy. So you have these three heads of liberty, so to speak. And the free speech thing is important and different to capitalism because you can imagine a situation where the government controls trade to a certain extent, but not necessarily speech, and so you can still have the free exercise of reason without having a commitment to allowing individuals to trade one with another, let's say. It might be difficult, but I do distinguish between these things. And so free speech entails things like, as I say, the free exercise of reason and rationality, and therefore the free exercise of science. Now, sometimes, as I've also argued in various places, it can be the case that the free exercise of science and the free exercise of trade can be at loggerheads. For example, let's take a modern day example. The search for a quantum computer, for engineering a quantum computer, this is a very modern example of where this tension arises. How does the tension arise? Well, on the one hand, science would say, let's just share all the information, let's have every institution, every physicist, every engineer that's working on this problem of trying to build the first quantum computer share their ideas so that we get there faster, so that we actually create, design, produce, manufacture quantum computers and spread them all around the world. And so we have this ratcheting up of progress and everyone gets a quantum computer and everyone has a faster technology and better technology much, much sooner. That's science wanting to do that. It's the pressure from science, attention from science. But it is itself in tension with free trade, because free trade would say, if you have a design, then you want to make profit from that design, quite rightly. And so you want to keep it secret. You want to be able to sell that at a profit. And so you don't want other people getting your plans. If you go sharing it to everyone, in the same way that Apple doesn't want to share their design for the latest iPhone, they want to keep it to themselves so that they can maximize their profits, quite rightly, so that they can then reinvest those profits into the next design and iterate and continue to make more profit and continue to improve their design and have ever better iPhones and make ever more money. And so this is in tension with the free exercise of science. So these two things can be in conflict with each other. So I don't know what the resolution to that is, by the way, except to say that these three things must exist in concert with each other: free trade, free vote, free speech. And the free speech, as I say, entails freely sharing information, knowledge, science, mathematics, philosophy, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes your ideas in science, philosophy, mathematics, whatever it happens to be, you don't want to just share them indiscriminately with everyone. You want to keep them to yourself in order that you make a profit, you personally, or your organisation, your company. So yeah, that's a problem. Okay, so let's get to actually playing some of this Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson clip. It's a 6-minute long clip that I'll split up into parts and do my usual response to each part.
Maybe we could turn our attention in this direction. You know, in this conversation, we've done a lot of what conservative types often do, which is to point to what's not good and to make a case for its pathology and danger. Now, it's that proclivity, let's say, that gives rise to the accusations from the radical utopians of the reactionary nature, let's say, of the right. Now, like I said earlier, I don't know if right and left, I don't believe even that the right and left is the right way to conceptualize what's going on in our society now. But again, we'll leave that aside. You know that with this Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, for example, that was started last year in the UK, we've been trying to outline something approximating a positive vision, rather than merely pointing to the evils of the current pathway. And that outlining of a more positive vision is something that conservatives aren't particularly good at.
So I absolutely agree. This is something conservatives aren't particularly good at. And what they are good at is critiquing, pointing out all the ways that the left is going wrong, as Jordan Peterson does so well and Douglas Murray does so well. Now, he says with his Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, this organisation that I will come back to towards the end of this particular episode here, that he's outlining something approximating a positive vision. And so he promises to do that in this episode, but he never quite gets there, to my mind. And even on the website, which we will come to, for this Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, I don't think he really gets it. He dances around, or the entire organisation dances around what the positive vision could be. And so that's why I'm going to do an episode after this, which will give you the meat of the matter, which will give you a positive vision. Because if he can't do it, and Douglas can't do it, and the Conservatives broadly can't do it, then I will. I'm not a Conservative. I, for example, do not think that tradition should be enshrined, not the traditions of the type that they talk about. I think that insofar as we're conserving something, we're conserving, as will be obvious to any of my fans, conserving the means of error correction, protecting the means of error correction, not destroying the means of error correction, however you want to frame that. That's the thing that we're conserving, our tradition of criticism, in other words. So I'm going to outline that broadly later on, and also in the next episode as well. But although Jordan promises that he's going to do something with respect to a positive vision, as I say, he doesn't quite get there. So let's keep on going.
And I can understand that in a sense, because it's strange times indeed where you have to point repeatedly about what should be self-evident in relationship to your culture to remind people that it exists. And at the deepest level, you might say, well, the confusion about what constitutes a woman is a cardinal example of that. It's like we're so lost that we can't agree on the distinction between the sexes. And so there isn't a form of loss that's more profound than that, as far as I can figure.
There isn't a form of loss that's more profound than that, he says at a minute 36 in, and he's talking about the loss of the distinction between a man and a woman. Well, there is. There's all sorts of things that are more profound than that are deeper than that. Logic would be one, the law of the excluded middle, as I like to talk about. What an electron is. There are many such things. People do debate the elasticity of the distinction between the sexes because they talk about gender being infinitely elastic, and I have some sympathy with that, but I don't have any sympathy with the idea that male and female can't be distinguished, because that depends on the distinction between chromosomes. So we have to have some shorthand way of referring to people with large gametes and small gametes, eggs versus sperm, or XX chromosomes in the case of eggs and XY chromosomes in the case of sperm. And the shorthand way of doing that is traditionally been male versus female, man versus woman. I don't see a problem with that's a biological fact of reality. It's as enshrined as the difference between different species, let's say, Homo sapiens versus cats or dogs or something like that. It's just a biological reality. Now, you might want to talk about gender expression and that kind of thing, and, how feminine or masculine certain personality traits are. Yeah. To me, that's not a particularly interesting discussion. Of course, people have always done this. They've, been gender-bending people as far back as ancient Greece. I know Indigenous Australians have their version of ladyboys, which is a Thai thing, and big deal. Big deal. Yeah, people have infinitely elastic personalities, and you might want to call that one aspect of that gender. The more interesting thing is the assault on biological realities and science, and therefore rationality and reason, that I think Jordan and Douglas highlight. Okay, let's pick it up again at minute 36.
So what do you see, let's say, as what do you offer, what do you console yourself even, let's say, with in regards to something approximating what is it that you're defending? What is it that's the West, let's say, that whose loss you're decrying? Like what's at the bottom of this that we're in such radical danger of losing? This is exactly what Dawkins was pointing to, however implicitly, when he described himself as a cultural Christian. It's like, okay, the West is under assault. Well, what is it that's worth defending precisely? And how do you conceptualize that and make it explicit? And so
Jordan's going on a bit here, up to 2 minutes 23. He's asking Douglas, what do you console yourself with? He said that Dawkins was pointing to it when he said he's a cultural Christian. So Jordan's put his cards on the table. He's saying that, well, Richard Dawkins is saying it's cultural Christianity. And, clearly that's what he thinks as well, that fundamentally this is the basis, something there is what we're defending in the West. And I just couldn't disagree more with this entire idea that it's fundamentally Christianity. But Douglas is on board with that idea as well. They all think that it's religion. They think it's Judeo-Christian values. That's what Ben Shapiro says. It's what the conservatives say broadly. And I think they get it wrong. Then again, I think the objectivists get it wrong because they trace it back to the ancient Greeks. And I just think there's something more modern that goes to the Enlightenment. David Deutsch illuminates. And sure, that has antecedents in both Judeo-Christianity and in ancient Greece, but it's a recent discovery made during the Enlightenment, but not made explicit, I would say, until the beginning of infinity, really, this tradition of criticism. Okay, are we eventually going to get to Douglas answering? We will, but we'll see whether or not he gives an answer. Jordan hasn't so far. He's just asking, what is it? Implying that it's something to do with Christianity. Okay, 2 minutes 23.
I mean, when I go to Europe, what do I love about Europe? The great beauty of its artistic tradition. That's something that, if you have any sense and any aesthetic sense at all, that drops you to your knees. To go to Italy, to a town like Florence, and to go into a random church where there's a painting that, if sold, would be worth $500 million, and to see it just hanging on the wall, unguarded, with no one around, well, what is that? That's an indication of two types of treasure. One, the art itself. Two, the fact that that art can just sit there without having 100 men with machine guns around it, making sure that no thug comes along and purloins it. So that's the treasure of that implicit trust that you described. So there's the beauty, there's the deep sense of voluntary civilization that characterizes Europe, right? There's a remarkable history of valuation of the individual all the way down the economic framework that's particularly present in the UK, probably. It's there in the Netherlands as well. There's other European countries that share that.
Okay, so we're at 3 minutes 30 now. He's still going on, not giving Douglas much of a chance to speak. And he's saying that it comes down to art. And he's saying that it comes down also to implicit trust, because no one is stealing these great works of art. And he mentions there the valuing of the individual. So we're getting a little bit closer. It's not art. It's not even trust. I think it's a bad metric as well. As I've made that point before, David Deutsch has made that point before, trust is a terrible metric. You know, what you really want is a positive theory of people's error correction mechanisms. You know, so what's going on in society, something to do with error correction rather than trust. Okay, everyone has an agreement, even if they don't explicitly say that this is what they're doing. It comes down to error correction, people correcting each other's errors. Namely, in this particular instance, there is a cultural pressure not to steal art or to value art, because that would be a terrible error to steal the art or to not value the art. Let's keep going. 3 minutes 30.
This is not no civilization and no culture. And then, so what is it that we should be promoting and fighting for, as far as you're concerned?
The main thing is that what you've just outlined, we should be continuing.
So 3 minutes 48, Douglas finally speaks, and he says, the main thing is what you outline and what we should be continuing. He didn't outline anything, Douglas. There was nothing there of substance that Jordan said. He just said, Richard Dawkins was pointing to something in Christianity. And he also mentioned something to do with art and not stealing the art, and something about the individual, which I think is a little bit closer. But he didn't really outline anything. He made a few assertions here and there. So Douglas is not getting there. So the audience is still left, I would say, confused about what is this positive vision? What is this thing that we're conserving if you're a conservative? Let's keep on going.
One of the things is where small c conservatism is that if the most radical figures on the left come up with completely bizarre new manifestos for what should happen, like the complete forgetting of biology or anything else, if they come up with that, it's true that others could resist that and say, no, we have an alternative utopian vision and so on. I myself not a devotee of that idea. I'm a devotee of the idea of returning to the sane and the normal and the pursuit of the beautiful and the true. Now, those are all things which you don't have to invent a whole new paradigm for. We have it in the civilization you just described, in the institutions, in the buildings, in the works of art, and much more. It's what I mean, think of it this way. What if, instead of everybody in our age who has any intelligence being told that they should use it to problematize history?
4 minutes 45. Okay, so he's covered the buildings, the art, and the institutions. Okay, so finally we're getting something, but it's just sort of glossed over. The institute. What does he mean by that? Which institutions? Why are they valuable? What is he talking about when it comes to institutions? Is he referring to ideas in people's minds? If so, what? Which ideas in people's minds? Again, we're not getting something explicit, some meat on the bone, so to speak, that the casual listener or viewer of this can really sink their teeth into.
And go over history, focus on things that were solved and try to unsolve them and make the situation worse. What if instead of that, people actually wanted to make history? What if instead of being figures who could make the past worse and approach it with greater lack of nuance than ever before, they decided to become historic figures themselves? Well, that would be something to aim for. What if instead of seeing the dozen or so figures that stand over the courtyard at Columbia University, Dante, Aristotle, and so on, what if instead of viewing them as simply dead white men, you viewed them as part of a tradition that you can be a part of and add to, and add to? Well, that would be something. And I think it's a very good vision for life. And I think it did our forebears well. And if you have a pride in that tradition, which certainly in Europe we have the right to, not to eradicate any dark times, goodness knows, but a right to have that tradition and to want to add to it and to want to preserve it and keep it going, that seems to me a pretty good basis for life. And remembering things that everyone knew until yesterday.
Okay, so at 6 minutes 20, they then move on to something completely different. So at no point, I don't think, do we get anything approximating a positive vision, which is what Jordan asked about. He himself danced around the question. Douglas touched on institutions, but never quite got there. So we don't get it. There's nothing there that helps people to understand what it should be. And if you're a conservative watching this, let alone if you're not, you're completely at sea. You're left in utter confusion about what on earth they're talking about. Something nebulous to do with art is the main message to take away. Maybe statues. Something about institutions, perhaps, but again, that's just glossed over. Which institutions? What do you mean by institutions? And so on and so forth. What it's about, so let me give you a taste of where I'm going to go with this in the next episode, is that it's about protecting the means of error correction. But, I've heard, when I've said this online to people, protecting is not enough. What we need to do is to improve our means of error correction. But I think that misses the mark and misses the central point of do not destroy the means of error correction. Because if you insist on an injunction like improving the means of error correction, well, that assumes that you're first protecting the means that already exist in order that you come up with an improvement, and protecting or preserving the means of error correction, not destroying it, entails, at some point, possibly improving them. But we don't always need to tinker with the means of error correction to try and improve it, because things can go wrong. But I'm on Jordan Peterson's side when it comes to all of these issues broadly, and he has talked about it when he had that famous interview where he talked about the importance of free speech and the importance of the possibility of offending people. What he was talking about, but he didn't fully understand, is that free speech is just one aspect of identifying and correcting errors. And the important part of correcting and identifying errors is perhaps to call out anti-rational memes, the things which disable people's critical faculties. Now, in order to do that, you have to be able to think. And to do that, to think effectively, you have to be able to speak, which is what Jordan Peterson's point in other places is. And so we've got free speech as one part of it, one part of identifying and correcting errors. And you need to have free speech because in order to speak, you first have to be able to think. And thinking and speaking work in concert with each other. Now, if you go to his alliance, ARC it's called, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, the ideas there also underpin the Jordan Peterson Academy as well, which is his new online university. It's an amazing venture. Both of these are amazing and important things to do, I think. It would help if they had input from someone like David Deutsch, let's say, but that man is very, very busy, so he likely doesn't have time to do this sort of thing. But they would only be helped by the philosophy of Karl Popper and perhaps, reference to the beginning of infinity, something like that. But anyway, you go to the ARC forum, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and he's got a section there called Our Questions. Here it is. And he asks what destiny we might envision and pursue. He also asks, how might we encourage individuals to reflect so they take on responsibility? How might we effectively conceptualize value and reward sacrificial, long-term, peaceful, child-centered, intimate relationships? Sacrificial, I don't know about that. Free exchange and good governance, how can we continue to gain from the genius of unbridled human innovation? So he's talking there about free trade, I think he calls it free exchange. Energy and resources, how to ensure provision of energy and resources. So that's all good stuff about progress. And then he has this thing about environmental stewardship. How might we properly pursue the environmental stewardship that people most that truly serve the needs and wants of individuals today? So some of this is misguided stuff. We don't need environmental stewardship. What we need is a stance towards progress, and we're going to do whatever it takes in order that humans can flourish maximally. And if that means the destruction of the environment, so be it. The environment is an inert, uncaring place. And so we need to shape the environment and the world and the universe around us. We are not going to steward the environment, we're going to shape the environment. We're going to control the environment. That's the important thing. We become like gods, essentially, in the sense that we are able to control matter and the forces of the universe in order that we create a home out of this hostile place that is the cosmos. Okay, so, but the other stuff there that he talks about, all are dancing around this fundamental question of what a positive vision will be. He's just asking questions without actually providing answers, I would suggest. So what are the answers? Well, it comes down fundamentally to this idea of do not destroy the means of error correction. And there are aspects to that. And so, I guess without further ado, move on to the next episode that I'm going to release simultaneously with this, that is about precisely this idea of what we do in order to have a positive vision about society, what we need to protect, what we need to conserve, how we need to ensure progress. So both the conservatives and the progressives have something right, but they both get wrong, respectively, what it means to make progress, and on the other hand, what it is that we're going to conserve and how these two things can work in concert one with another. Okay, let's go there. But if you're just watching this now and you're going to move on to other things, well, I want to say to you, stay optimistic, and until next time, have fun.